Hey up guys, it's the Yorkshire Pudding, but for this series you can call me the Chinese Dumpling. This is the second video in this series, so if you haven't yet watched the first video where I discuss the food and drinks in China, click on the link in the description below. In this video I'll be discussing the culture and things to do and see whilst in China. Just like my first video, I'll start with a disclaimer. I do not claim to be an expert on all things China, and I'm coming from a perspective of a tourist who has recently visited China, to discuss whether or not it's worth you visiting there on your next holiday. If there's anything in the video you feel is inaccurate, please let me know in the comment section below. Firstly, like many Asian countries, China has quite a collectivist society compared to the more individualistic West. Your social standing, saving face, shame, and relationship networks are concepts that seem to play a larger role in Chinese society than they do in countries like America or the UK. I'm not saying that every Chinese person thinks this way, or that every Westerner is opposed to this mindset, but it seems to be a general trend. There also seems to be greater respect and duty towards elders. For example, the metros we used all had specific seats on them that were coloured differently and were labelled as courtesy seats, which are seats you may sit on but are supposed to be offered to the elderly along with pregnant women and disabled people. I didn't actually see any pregnant women in my entire trip to China, so honestly I wonder how the population is around 1.4 billion. I did however see a lot of people using umbrellas, so perhaps it works a bit like it does in the Gremlins where they multiply when they get wet. The people were often very happy to help me and my friend whenever we wanted directions, and were always patient enough to translate a question from English to Mandarin using a translation app. They'd also load up their app and talk back. I cannot say this for some parts of the world that I've visited before, as there's some places where I feel like there's a general disdain for tourists and a lack of patience when one is seeking help. Some were also very keen to practice their English. Most people in China didn't seem to know much English at all, but using these translation apps made getting around a lot smoother. Although there's an obvious language barrier in most places we went to except for tours, hotels and a few tourist sites, you could tell the people were very friendly. And on some occasions quite intrigued and excited by seeing a couple of Westerners. Don't be surprised if people come up to you asking for a picture. This happened to us over a dozen times during our stay, and it felt quite normal and expected by the end of it. We even caught some people sneaking a photo of us when they thought we weren't looking. It didn't bother us at all and we found it quite amusing. I even waved to one lady who was in the process of taking one, and she sort of laughed and put her phone down as if she wasn't. I'm sort of hoping she was actually taking a picture of us now, because if she genuinely wasn't, then it probably would have looked quite weird in hindsight. The people in general tend to keep to themselves but are often friendly when you speak to them. I also find it helps to learn a couple of phrases in Mandarin. Nobody expects you to have a C2 level of understanding of Chinese before you go, but learning a couple of phrases shows you've made an effort. Secondly, as a Brit we say thank you a lot. We say thank you to the smallest things, whether it's buying a chocolate bar from the shop, or even something we say sometimes when we're saying goodbye on the phone. Thank you, see you later. It's the same as saying sorry in England. If someone bangs into us in England, we're the ones who say sorry. It's not meant as a serious, I deeply apologise for this occurrence and it will never under any circumstances happen again. Please forgive me. It's more just a way of showing that there's no hard feelings and being polite. When we say thank you a lot of the time it's really not that deep. The reason I'm saying this is because saying thank you in one language does not necessarily culturally translate exactly into another. It appears to be said less frequently in China, but when it's said it's meant with more meaning. This is what a tour guide told me and my friend when I asked him how to pronounce some basic phrases in Shanghai. Apparently it's also said less often between close friends and family members too, as it creates a bit of a formality barrier, whereas true thankfulness is often displayed more in actions rather than repeated use of the word thank you. That being said, I still did hear it quite often, and by no means did I sense people were being unpolite if someone didn't say thank you in a setting which often would have been used in the UK. I think in some ways Chinese and English speakers have something in common though. If you go to many places in Europe, they'll automatically speak back to you in English that's probably better than your own, or if not, they'll have broken English but still make a good effort to talk to you. If they don't know any English, they'll use their own language but speak very slowly and maybe speak a word or two in English that they picked up from school so that you can both piece together the conversation. At the very least, they'll know how to say, "Me no know English." Even in Thailand or Mozambique I could get around fairly easy and many seem to know a decent amount of English. However, in the English speaking world, we just speak to anyone we meet and assume they know English and get confused when the other person doesn't understand. It was like this in China. They'll just speak to you in perfect, fast Mandarin, as if all of a sudden you'll pick up on a few words that they're saying and begin to understand. And then when you say, "Sorry, I don't know any Mandarin," they'll just continue to speak to you as if you'll have a sudden realisation that you actually do know Chinese, you just forgot and suddenly you'll start speaking back to them fluently. I genuinely found this quite amusing, as I almost feel like it's how many other people who are not native English speakers feel when a native English speaker speaks to them. A stalemate did often occur where I would speak back to them in fluent English, again wondering when they'd suddenly remember that they did indeed also know fluent English and was at any moment about to switch back to it. There's no hate behind this, of course. It's just that for most people, the vast majority of people you speak to throughout your life will be able to understand you as an English speaker, and in China, the vast majority of people they speak to will know Mandarin. I think the biggest reason this occurs is because we both want to be polite, but since Mandarin and English are both completely different languages, there's almost no common ground in the words. You cannot even read the text, as they of course don't use the Romanized alphabet either. At least in France you can try and pronounce the words. You may butcher the pronunciation, but you've at least got half a chance of getting across what you're trying to say. You cannot just make up the Chinese words or guess what they are, so you have the option of just staring at the other person silently, or responding in your own language to show that you're not just ignoring them and want to engage. Of course, this is when the language app usually comes out. As much as a lifesaver this app is, it's very common for the meaning to be lost in translation however. Although I did not know how well my English got translated into Mandarin, I did see what Mandarin got translated into English. The word she often got translated to he. Maybe they do not distinguish in their language when referring to males or females in the context of he or she, like in ours. I'm not sure. And sometimes phrases were translated sort of well, but with a few obvious errors. But other times we had absolutely no idea what the question or statement was. Therefore, I made the assumption that a lot of the time it would be the same for me when I translated English into Mandarin. So yeah, with regards to the people, they generally have a different cultural mindset to many Western countries, but ultimately the people are friendly, often happy to help if needed, and although there's a bit of a language barrier, there's a general understanding, and with a bit of patience you can both work around it. But on to the other aspect of culture, particularly the traditional side. Everywhere you go there's temples, Chinese architecture, Chinese lanterns, Chinese symbolism, traditional Chinese foods, Chinese tea, Chinese music playing either by live performers or through a speaker, people doing Tai Chi in the park early in the morning, people, mainly women, wearing traditional clothing, Chinese wisdom such as phrases, sayings, superstitions, medicine and philosophy, Chinese flags, both on poles and carried about by the people as you walk around, and a general sense of pride in the country wherever you went. I think the last reason is responsible for why all the others are so prevalent throughout China, at least the areas I travelled to: Shanghai, Beijing and these three here, to name a few. The vast majority of people there were also Chinese, so the culture has not been diluted either. It was nice to see the pride that they have in the country and the traditions they've kept. Of course, it's safe to assume that the culture in modern China is not the same as it's always been. Social media is definitely more prevalent now, and there seems to be less rickshaws and tuk-tuks in cities than you see in the older footage, and have been replaced by a lot of cars. Felt like around 70% of the cars in Shanghai were electric as well. It's definitely more modernised now, but there are still great reminders that you're still in China, and they're not afraid to show it with the aspects of Chinese culture are listed above. Even Shanghai, which is possibly the most multinational of the Chinese cities, and being a place of business in contrast to the more cultural capital of Beijing, still has a lot of rich culture despite seeming so futuristic and advanced. I think it's an example of modernisation done right, embracing the new technology whilst retaining cultural traditions, because once they've gone it's hard to bring them back. There's also a ton of big housing blocks dotted around China and around the cities, where you see not just half a dozen towers, not just a few dozen, not a few hundred, but literally thousands of these structures stretching all over for miles in a 360 view. On one hand it may feel a bit dystopian. On the other hand, should housing the public really be considered dystopian? China's got about 1.4 billion people as mentioned earlier. Building upwards saves a lot more land than building outwards. Being from Western Europe, this was probably one of the largest culture shocks. Just the vast scale and size of, well, everything. From the towers in Shanghai to the number and size of all the apartment blocks to China itself. I've never seen anything quite like it. In Britain there's so many zoning laws, planning permission red tape and regulations on how high buildings can be, even if the city already looks like a concrete jungle. I can understand not wanting to turn York or Bath into a big skyline full of skyscrapers, but do we really need these restrictions on all the modern cities that are already past this point? Of course we pride ourselves on our highest building standards here in England. Our standards are that high that we're essentially standing still. The whole world is making progress and building infrastructure, bridges, tunnels and all new cities, whilst to do that in a shorter amount of time and with a lower overall cost than it takes you just to get the planning permission to start the project. And then when it starts we don't even bloody finish it. I'm not saying England is all bad of course, and there's many great things about it too, and this may deserve a video in its own, but the visit to China has just opened my eyes to how fast other parts of the world are developing compared to the country who once never saw the sunset. So back to the culture in China, it's one of the biggest highlights of the trip, especially if you're coming from the West. Everything will just seem so different and interesting, from the modern high-tech bullet trains and skyscrapers like the Shanghai Tower or the Oriental Pearl Tower, to the street food, music, mannerisms of the Chinese, and a constant reminder that you're in China by the architecture, decorations and overall style. We didn't go in Chinese New Year, the Mid-Autumn Festival or Qingming, but I'm sure these would have been amazing experiences as well. The fact that we didn't go during a festival and still felt the cultural vibe is a testament to how prevalent the culture is over there. Although there are beaches and islands in China that you may go to visit for a more relaxing beach holiday in the sun, the chances are, if you're travelling all the way to China as opposed to Benidorm or Mallorca, it's probably because you're seeking something different and unique, not just a place to get a suntan, although you'll probably get that here too if you go in summer. That's why I'm going to rate this place 10 out of 10 for culture. Oh, and just one quick cultural tip before I move on. Don't stick chopsticks in rice. It's considered rude and is associated with death rituals. Now moving on to things to see and do. We never ran out of things to do in China. We could have stayed there another week at least in each location we visited and still felt like there was more to do. Although my previous video went into food in more detail, it's still one of the activities you'll be doing a lot in China, and since the food is a big part of the culture and there's so many types to choose from, you'll never get bored. Same with the drinks, particularly the tea. Speaking of tea, going to a tea ceremony is one of the things you can do and should do whilst in China. If you enjoy walks, then there's also good news because there's plenty of opportunities to walk in China, whether it's on the Great Wall, walking the streets in urban cities, strolling through the local parks, or just getting to the next sightseeing location in the itinerary. Even using the metros requires a bit of walking, they're ginormous on the inside. Then you have to walk the maze at the other side to get back out again. The scale of China's just so big, and since you'll be on holiday, you'll probably want to see and do a lot of things whilst there. Needless to say, we did about 35,000 steps on a couple of days and averaged about 25,000 steps per day over the course of the trip. After all the walking, you'll be relieved to know that there's a lot of good massages you can have in China. Chinese massages remind me of Thai massages, in a sense that you felt like you're doing 6 rounds with Mike Tyson. They're painful and get deep into the tissue, or what felt more like my bones. You do feel like a new person after it though. It does seem to actually work. The Western massages I've had are very relaxing, but my body just doesn't seem to feel the same way afterwards compared to a Thai or Chinese massage. Even if you go for a deep tissue one, a Western deep tissue feels more like a slightly firm pinch, whereas the Chinese are coming in with the elbows. The bad news is if it's hurting too much, you can't exactly tell them to stop because they won't understand you. Foot massages seem to be another big thing in China. They start by bathing your feet in a warm bath of herbs, milk, ginger, or whatever else they can find in the pantry. Then they massage your shoulders and neck for about 15 minutes or so before starting the foot massage. Then they get the knuckle or some sort of stick to draw these lines on your foot. It's supposed to help other parts of your body apparently. If they do the middle part, carefully missing the gallbladder of course, it'll help your liver. But in all honesty, I felt my liver a lot more when the elbows started getting used. They then finish off by hitting your calves and feet with these long batons. So if you can put up with all that, it's worth it. I did feel like it helped me a lot and it kept me going throughout the trip as I went on multiple occasions. All jokes aside, it's worth going at least once just to try it, especially if you've never been to an Asian massage place before. Just a word of warning, go to a decent establishment for your massage. Hotels usually overcharge, and ladies on motorbikes coming up to you in the middle of the street usually overservice. I asked my food tour guide where the best place was to go and he recommended an area not too far from the place I was staying, but outside of the hotel itself and in a proper establishment. One last thing on massages. They also offer traditional Chinese cupping. They put a flammable liquid in these glass cups, light it on fire and put them on you. Then the pressure changes in the cup whilst it's on your back and it leaves a bruise afterwards, indicating you've been healed. This was harder to believe when my back turned from a skin colour to a pomegranate colour. I tried this and I had huge red spots all over my entire back and shoulders for the entire trip. It did actually hurt a bit, I'm not gonna lie, but the relief at the end was great. Not sure that counts though. If somebody starts to strangle you, it probably feels quite good when they eventually let go too. If I did try it again, this time in a separate place and on my foot after a foot massage after I said I'd been getting a bit of pain in a certain part after walking, and it did genuinely help. The increased blood flow to the area is supposed to stimulate the healing process. Other things to do include watching kung fu shows or even tai chi in the local parks, shopping in the markets, doing skywalks when you're up a big skyscraper or walking over a long bridge in the mountains. There seems to be quite a few of these types of things in China. Visiting at festival time, take boat rides or just explore. It goes without saying that there's also all the great sightseeing to do whilst you're there, from temples, parks, gardens, hutongs in Beijing, the Great Wall of China, water towns, lakes, Forbidden City, terracotta army, tea plantations, the list goes on. One thing I'd consider whilst doing there, if your budget allows, is spending at least a night in the Shanghai Tower. This is one of the nicest hotels I've ever stayed at. The breakfast and afternoon tea are excellent, and at night the 4 restaurants open at the top of the tower. There's an Italian, Japanese, Cantonese and Shanghai restaurant, the latter being called the Heavenly Gin and was the one we ate at. This holds the record for the highest restaurant in the world, and the views at both day and night are amazing. We made a day over being in and around the hotel. There's also the world's highest swimming pool, there's a gym, a spa and a bar. The hotel itself is the highest hotel in the world, well, depending on how it's defined. There's larger hotels in Dubai, but these are buildings specifically made to be hotels. The Shanghai Tower is offices for the most part, with the hotel at the top of the building, which you access from another side of the building. Definitely a cool experience. This hotel does cost significantly more than all the others you'll find in Shanghai though, but if you still want to take a look at the view from the tower but don't want to spend a small fortune, I believe you can visit the Shanghai Tower Observatory on the 118th floor, which is only 2 floors below the Heavenly Gym restaurant, so you'll still get an awesome view. Considering China's so large, has a long history, different climates, foods, traditions, it's really hard to get bored in China. There's so much to see and do, whether it's go for a beach holiday down in the south, like Hainan Island, go to the snowy mountains of Tibet, visit the Gobi Desert, see the bamboo forest, or go to the more temperate areas up north, explore the urban cities or in contrast the rural countryside, and within each of these areas there's a whole itinerary of things to do. For that reason, I'm going to give things to see and do another 10. There's been places I've visited and only after a week, if not a couple of days in some places, I felt like I was running out of things to do. But after 2.5 weeks in China, I felt like there's actually more I want to do now than there was before I went, and we're already planning a second trip. I'm not being sponsored to make this video, I promise you. I generally wouldn't say these things if I didn't think it was true, and the fact that I've had such a great time was one of the things that inspired me to make these series in the first place. The only thing I'd say is that trip is only as fun as you choose to make it, so if you want to make the most out of China, think of a few things you want to do before you go and get engaged with it whilst you're there. Please consider subscribing to be notified when my final part of this series is released, where I discuss the affordability of visiting China and accessibility for the average Westerner. And until next time, I'll see you later.